Hi, so today I'm going to show you how to install a subwoofer in a car. I have actually done something similar to this before. I did one in the Mini Cooper and I did one in the Mercedes-Benz. They weren't the best recorded, so I'm going to try to go through the basics, talk about what we're doing, and we're going to install in this Mini Cooper, which really it's pretty similar for just about any car. So what do we need? Well, we have a subwoofer in a box. This is an 8-inch sub. It's a JBL GTO 804. You can use any subwoofer that you want, 2 subs, 3 subs, 10 subs, you know, whatever. You need an amplifier. For this amplifier, I have an Alpine. It's a PDR M65. It's like a 600 watt monoblock, and I've used this in several cars before. It works well for a little hatchback like this, just like that 8-inch sub does. I don't really need a whole lot to make that car sound good. We're going to need an Amplifier Installation Kit. So I've got this is an install bay kit. This came from probably Best Buy or some audio store. I really like the New Concepts ones that they sell on Amazon, so I'll put a link to that in the description. This is just something I was able to get locally, but the New Concept ones, if I had a choice, that's what I would buy. So let's talk about what's in the kit. So we have a power wire and ground wire. We have some connectors. We have a fuse holder. We have some RCA cables. We have some speaker wire. And we have a remote turn-on wire. I do have some other stuff here as well that I've had from other installations. I have some power wire. I have this Cat 5, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I do also have a remote bass knob for this amplifier. So let's talk about some basic things. So what does an amplifier need to run a subwoofer? Well, it needs power and ground. So power from the battery, chassis ground from somewhere on the chassis. It needs a way to turn on, which is this kind of middle pin here. It's called remote. It needs some signal coming in, and it needs signal going out to your subwoofer. Very simple. Optionally, but highly recommended, especially if you're using a factory head unit like we're going to in this Mini. Something like this bass knob can be really helpful to allow you to have some control over the subwoofer from the driver's seat. Now, let's talk about the kind of the concepts and where we're going to get things. Power is obviously going to come from the battery. Ground is going to come from the chassis. I need to turn this thing on. So there's a couple different ways that you can do that. If you have an aftermarket head unit, your head unit will automatically have a wire called remote, which is an output that's designed to turn this on. So you turn on your head unit, it turns on the amplifier. Very basic. If you're using a car that does not have an aftermarket head unit, then you need to find something that can be equivalent to that. So there's 3 different ways that you can do that. Number 1, you can try to find an ignition wire inside your car, meaning that a wire that when you turn your car on, it powers up. When you turn your car off, it powers off. Sometimes that can come from like a cigarette lighter. Sometimes that can come from behind the radio. Sometimes that can come from all kinds of different places. That's the one that's going to be the biggest variation based on the car that you're using. If you don't want to worry about that, you can get a smart amplifier like this PDR M65, which will actually sense signal and automatically turn itself on when the radio comes on and there's audio output. They work fairly well. Sometimes in certain cars like GMs or Mercedes, they might use the factory radio for certain things like your door chime. So you might find that these amplifiers turn on a little bit more often than you exactly want them to, but it usually doesn't cause any ill effects, especially for a subwoofer. So that's what I'm going to do here. They also make an aftermarket device that can be used with an amplifier that doesn't have that automatic turn on, that will sense signal on the speaker wires and turn the amplifier on for you. PAC, Pacific Accessories Company, and Access both make things that can do that. So what we're going to be doing in this car is we're going to be installing the amplifier under this false floor panel. We're going to be getting ground back here somewhere. Power is going to come from the battery up in the front. And our signal for the amplifier is going to come from the factory amplifier, which my factory amplifier is in that side panel over there, kind of behind those two speakers. It's a Harman Kardon system in this car. Most vehicles at this point are going to have some sort of factory amplifier that's separate from the radio that's up in your dash, especially if it's, you know, anything made in like the last, let's say 10 years. You know, my Ford Focus had one in the trunk. My Mercedes had one in the back of the vehicle. All of my Mercedes have had them in the back of the vehicle. This Honda has one kind of back here behind this panel. My last two Minis had them both in here. So it depends on the car where it's located, but you can get the signal at a variety of places. If you don't know where your amplifier is, you can actually get it at the speakers. If you do know where the speakers are. So I could very easily pull it off of like the back speakers that are right there. That's not ideal because this has factory subwoofers, so I actually want the factory subwoofer connection, but we'll talk about that later. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start taking the car apart. I'm going to remove this panel. I'm going to remove the back seat. I'm going to remove the sill plate up there, and I'm going to remove the cover for the battery under the hood. So let's get all of that taken apart. I've done this in videos before. It's fairly easy to find. Like, these things unsnap. The seat, you just hold it at the right angle and you kind of lift it out. You know, the sill plate over here unsnaps. So we'll get this all taken apart. All right, so I have the back seat out. I unsnap this side here. If you're doing a Mini Cooper, there's a single 10mm bolt here under a plastic cover. Then you can lift the backs of the seats out. The seats need to be in a position like this so that they can come out of that, because it's kind of like keyed on both sides. You'll see what I mean when you're taking yours out. This just unsnaps except for two screws. There's one here and one kind of in the same spot but up on that pillar. And they're underneath the top covers. Top covers just unsnap. This unsnaps and the side of the dash unsnaps out. So when you're running your power wire through your firewall, it's a really challenging part of the installation. So, you know, what I did here, I have like this factory rubber grommet that goes through the firewall, and that factory rubber grommet, it's a giant piece of rubber. And I ended up, you know, away from the harness, which is down there, I drilled a hole to put this through. Now, you might have to drill metal. You might get lucky. Like if you're driving an automatic car and the car is available in a manual, you'll find there might be just like a big rubber grommet that you can poke a hole through that is designed for the clutch cable that your car doesn't have because it's, you know, the wrong version of the car. So here I've got my power wire through. Now this needs to run to the back of the car. At this point, it's a good time to think about, is there anything else that needs to run from the front of the car to the back of the car? So you might have, say, speaker wires for signal or something along those lines. For me, I've got a bass knob and I've got a cable that I'm going to run for my bass knob. Now, because my bass knob has been in a couple cars before, I'm going to use network cable, Cat5, and I'm going to run this, and I'll put ends on it at the end, and I'll show you that. But normally, if you're using a new bass knob, it's going to come with a cable, and you'll run that cable here as well. So I'm going to run this kind of over to where I want it to be, and then I'm going to run both of these to the back of the car, and just kind of tuck it underneath this carpet down here where the factory wires are. If there's wires there from the factory, that's a good spot to run cables, because the factory has deemed that it was safe to do so. All right, so we've got our power wire run to the back of the car. It's coming out there. Over here is where our factory amplifier was in this car, and I tapped into the leads that feed the subwoofers. So here's one of them, and here's the other. Wiring diagram for your car can really help with this. You know, BMW TIS has wiring diagrams for BMW. There are other sources for other cars. ALLDATA is a good one. Oftentimes you can pay for like a day if you can't find a wiring diagram online. So I'm going to tape this harness back up. I'm going to plug this back in, and we're going to kind of finish routing the wires through and down, and then I'm going to make the wires kind of pop out down here for me to put my amplifier right there. Alright, so you'll see that I've routed the wires up with the factory harnesses, same spots that everyone else runs. And then here, I ended up taking the back panel out so that I could kind of tuck these wires in. Now you might ask, well, why don't you just run over here? And the reason is I didn't want to get stuck in these clamps for the bottom of the seat, and I also didn't want to get stuck in the hinges for the back of the seat. So factory wire locations are always going to be helpful. For your ground, a lot of people struggle with the ground. I usually look for a factory location, so right there, that bolt, that bolt's a factory ground right there, so I just use that and put my 4-gauge right underneath it. So here are my wires. I'm going to vacuum this tub out, and I'm going to put the seat back in, and then we'll get the amplifier installed and kind of finish this up. So, when we're getting our fuse holder connected, you'll notice that I left a little bit of wire here. We really want our fuse holder to be as close to the battery as possible. And the reason for that is because if this wire shorts out behind this fuse holder, it's going to pop the fuse. But if it shorts out between the battery and the fuse holder, it's going to melt the wire or potentially blow up your battery. So we want to be forward of as much as possible. So I'm going to put my fuse holder, somewhere in this area here, maybe right up in here, and connect it to this guy, and just kind of keep it as close to the battery terminal as possible. And we're going to connect to our positive terminal here. All right, so you can see here, my power wire is connected. My fuse holder's back there. Yes, I know I don't have a boot on this. It really isn't necessary. Realistically, this is all power in this area. So you'll see my fuse holder's there, and it's mounted. So don't just leave it flopping around because it's gonna bust. All right, so our project is complete. Subwoofer's installed. Our amplifier is down below, and everything is where it should be. And it sounds good. I'm pretty happy with it overall. All right, so I realized that I went through it quickly and I talked generically. This isn't about putting a subwoofer in a Mini Cooper. I've already done that video. This is about putting a subwoofer in a car in general. So I'm gonna give you a couple tips that I think are really helpful to make this successful or as easy as possible. Number one, I think that there are two tools that you just need to have. First off, a set of wire strippers that are this style. The ones that I use are Vice Grip brand. They come from Lowe's. They're relatively inexpensive. I think they're about 15 bucks for this pair of strippers. Klein makes them, GB makes them. There's a bunch of different versions. You can find them at most big box stores. I like the Vice Grip ones the best. I've used the other ones as well, the Gardner Benders and the other brands. These ones work really, really well. And what this allows you to do is to take a wire, like a speaker wire that's existing in your car, and strip the center of it without breaking that wire in half and tap into it very easily. I think that it just makes these types of things very easy, especially if you're doing alarms, remote car starters, or any sort of electrical work in a car. You shouldn't be using those vampire clips, those little plastic clips that you can snap over the top of a wire. Those suck. This is the right way to do it. And this is the best tool for the job. Number two, you should have a panel tool. Something like this. This is a snap-on one. This is not necessarily what you need. Sonic makes one, Harbor Freight sells them. I mean, there are a variety of brands that make a tool that looks like this. They often come in a set of 3, where there's a short one like this, there's a long one that's maybe about this long, and then there's one that has a smaller fork on the end. If you only buy one, this is the one that you want. The larger fork, the shorter length. If you can buy all 3, great. But I use this one 95% of the time, and I use the other 2 the other 5% of the time. As far as supplies go, buy a quality amp kit, something that comes from a reputable brand name. Amp of America or Install Gear, those are like kind of the less expensive ones. If you get into like a Stinger kits, New Concept, some of those others, they're even better quality components and thicker, heavier gauge wire, especially when you're doing larger sound systems. Those become more important. I really like the New Concept kit. They're about 40 bucks on Amazon, so I'm going to put a link to that in the description. That's the one that I would recommend that you buy. That's what I'll buy when I do the Honda. There are a lot of electrical tapes out there, but you want Super 33 Plus. It's a 3M product. It's got a yellow core, it looks like that, and it says Super 33 Plus right on it. This is like a $5 roll of electrical tape, and I'm telling you, it is the best electrical tape that money can buy. The other tapes, they fail, they get hot in the summertime and the heat coming through your windows, they fail, they come unstuck, they leave residue all over the place. This is by far the best tape. From somebody who did it professionally for years and had the lifetime warranty their installs, I'm telling you, Super 33 is the one to buy. If you find yourself in a situation where you need a thicker tape than Super 33, maybe you want to provide some extra protection, Super 88 is also a good option, but this is better, superior in my opinion, in terms of regular everyday use. Next thing, take your time when you're doing this. Just slow down, pay attention to your details. You're going to have to watch out for clips that stay behind when you unsnap panels, and you're going to have to remove those so that you can put them back in where they belong and you can snap your panels back together right. Most cars today should be able to go back together 100%. You shouldn't have broken clips and broken panels and those types of things if you're taking them apart right and you're taking your time and you're using the proper tools. Like I mentioned when I was doing the fuse holder under the hood, put that as close to your battery as possible and mount it. Even if it's just with double-sided tape or with a zip tie or something along those lines, don't just leave it flopping around in there, because what happens is it busts over time, and then the fuse holder comes open, and then you've got this big metal contact that's floating around your engine bay, and it'll smack into a shock tower or something, short itself out, melt the wires. I've seen it happen. So mount that thing if you can. When you're installing your subwoofer in the back, I recommend that you leave enough speaker wire to get from, to basically the entire place where that subwoofer could be. So if you're putting it in an SUV and the subwoofer is going to be in the corner, have enough speaker wire that if it slid all the way to the opposite corner, it wouldn't unplug itself. Because inevitably it's going to happen. You're going to have to move it because you're putting something big in. Something's going to happen where that may come unplugged, or it may slide around, or it may have to be moved for some reason. So just give yourself some extra speaker wire. It doesn't really hurt anything to do that. I really like using banana plugs to plug into the bottom of my box. I especially like these, where they have the 2 pins. Not all boxes will work with that. Some boxes have a wider separation between the 2 banana plugs, and this won't fit in there, and you're stuck using the separate ones. But it makes it really easy to take a subwoofer out, put a different subwoofer in, or just to remove it because, say, you have to put a bunch of bags of mulch in the back of your SUV or something along those lines. Larger things will sometimes make it so that your subwoofer gets displaced, and having those banana plugs is going to make it really easy to disconnect and remove. I like these specifically because they're always separate, so even if I unplug this, I don't have to worry about the banana plugs potentially touching each other. If you get into a situation where you have 2 separate banana plugs and you have to unplug them, just tie them together in a knot, and you'll see that the little ends will kind of stick apart from each other, and that'll keep them from hitting each other. After your installation, you're going to want to listen to a bunch of different music. I would recommend keeping like a flathead screwdriver or whatever you use to adjust your amplifier. I'd recommend keeping one in your car for a week or 2, because you're inevitably going to want to tweak it, and having to come home and go in the garage and find your tool and do all of that is going to make it so that you don't. But spend some time with it, tweak, adjust, figure out where you want to be. If you're going to be using a factory sound system and you're not putting an aftermarket head unit in your car, buy a bass knob. I'm telling you, buy a bass knob, because inevitably you're going to want to adjust the volume from the driver's seat. For whatever reason, you're going to want to do it at some point in the future, and not having a bass knob makes that really, really hard to do. And it might just be something as simple as you're taking your grandma to the doctor, and you want to just turn it down so that, because grandma she's not a headbanger anymore. Something along those lines. It's nice to have the bass knob, especially when you're running from a factory head unit, especially because all music is going to play differently. Your subwoofer may be really loud on some songs and not as loud on other songs, and having that adjustability from the driver's seat is really nice. Even if you do have an aftermarket head unit, that has subwoofer control, you might still want a bass knob because it's quicker to grab it and adjust it than it is to like go into the menu, go down to audio, choose subwoofer, turn the thing left and right. You know, that sometimes can be a pain in the butt depending on the head unit, so it might be nice to have it anyway. And that's really about it. You know, like I said, take your time, have the right tools. It goes in well, and you know, it's pretty easy to do a good job. Make sure you're cleaning up after yourself, make sure you're vacuuming. When you've got your seats out, it's a good opportunity to clean underneath the seats because there's crumbs and crap that's down there. You know, if maybe you want to clean your seats while you have them out, it might be really nice to do that, you know, to use some Alcantara cleaner or some you know, interior shampoo or something like that to clean it up. It's a good opportunity when they're already out. So that's it for today. You know, thank you for watching. I hope that this is helpful. You know, if you're looking for advice on your specific car and your specific setup, feel free to post in the comments, and I'll do my best to try to help people out as much as I can. One last thing. So if you're having issues and you're troubleshooting, a couple things. Number one, start with the basics. Make sure that you have power. Make sure that you have ground. Make sure that, you know, if you're using like a signal sensing or something like that, that your amplifier is in the right mode. And make sure it's powering on. Is it getting power? Is it getting ground? An easy way to test that is by using a multimeter or a test light and just making sure that it has what it needs to have. Number two, if your amplifier is on but you don't have any audio output, you might have your inputs out of phase. So what that means is your speakers have a plus and a minus. And while you can mix those up and it'll still play sound, if you have two inputs, a left and a right, and you have a plus and a minus here and a minus and a plus here, they negate each other and you're going to end up with very close to zero. So one thing that you could try doing, if you have like very, very, very low output and you can't figure out why, unplug one of your RCA cables and see what happens. And if it gets loud and it starts playing and everything starts working and sounding, you know, like normal, what that means is your inputs are out of phase. So you want to flip the speaker wires that connect one of those RCA cables the opposite way, positive to negative, negative to positive, and plug it back in, and what you'll find is that your volume returns and everything sounds normal the way that it should. Now, somebody who knows about audio might say, well, depending on which one you flip over, you're going to put your subwoofer out of phase. Your subwoofer is often going to be out of phase anyway, so that's going to take me to number three, which is when you get your subwoofer in your car and everything is playing and working, at some point, find some songs that you really like, that you're familiar with, that you've listened to quite a bit, and take your positive and negative on your subwoofer and flip them over so that your subwoofer is, the negative is going in the positive and the positive is going in the negative, and listen to it and see how it sounds. It might sound better, it might sound worse, but there's this concept of phase where your speakers are all trying to play the same sounds at the same time. And your subwoofer being in a different position in the car and bouncing off of the back of your vehicle, like on your hatch, can sometimes cancel out the bass from your speakers. So if you flip that, you might get closer in phase to where your speakers are and make it so that you don't have a reduction in bass, you have an increase in bass, or you might have tighter bass or better sounding bass. So what I'm getting at is just try it, flip them over, try it, listen to it, see if you like it. It might be better, it might be worse. If it's worse, flip it back. It's very easy to switch it back. But that's all I've got for today. So thank you for watching and have a great day.